Okay, we're all set. Great, we got this set up. So I appreciate you agreeing to join me for this interview and sharing your experience related to deaf education. I do have a list of questions ready, but we'll go ahead and let you begin with an opening statement, please.
Thank you for this time and this opportunity to have this discussion. I'd like to talk about the IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. That law was established in 1975, and the original law was PL 94142. Public law. And the goal for that, it actually focused on four things. They wanted to ensure that students with disabilities, SWD, had access to free and appropriate public instruction. Secondly, they gave the parents the right to advocate for their child's needs. Thirdly, they hold local or state governance to ensure that they are supporting those students with disabilities. And lastly, they measure how that platform model is successful. So that law was passed in 1975, and the federal, those 21, now is 17, those measures the delivery model of services to students with disabilities. And that started not too long ago. I don't have the exact date, but I would say probably within the last 25 years. And that leads to the different measurements in ensuring that this district serves students with disabilities. The reason is before 1975, many students with disabilities did not have access to education for different reasons: equipment, interpreting, really anything that is tied to cost. The family may have to pay out, or there may be no resources to support the child where they're not able to access appropriate education. So that law was established to make sure that the students does not have any restrictions, that they are open and able to access schools. And that was the purpose of that law.
Great. Thank you for that opening statement and expanding a little bit. I just want the community to understand. Some are familiar, some are not. My goal with this conversation is for the community to have a similar level of understanding and different perspectives. So if a situation comes up in the future, the community has a level of awareness that can grow and they can respond appropriately in supporting the improvements of access to deaf education for deaf students. I know IDEA, well, really Public Law of 94-142 was set up, and then it was renamed to IDEA. And in IDEA, they also have LRE. LRE means least restrictive environment. So their vision was all people with disabilities would be integrated into society fully. That was the basic premise behind their vision. However, IDEA created an interesting challenge for the deaf community. One example of this is deaf schools. A school district would say, because we provide interpreters, you don't need to go to the deaf school. You can just stay local and get support at home from the local district. This caused those deaf schools, their numbers were quite large and they started to dwindle. So in the past, I don't know, maybe 20 to 30 years, those numbers have gone down. They used to be 400, 500, even 700 at times students. Then about a year and a half ago or so, I learned about indicators in the state performance plan. I didn't know about that previously. So I started looking to it, and whenever I drilled down, I saw something under 5C where it noted about a separate school. From that information, I still don't fully understand what it meant, but that's why it prompted me to reach out to you, and I was hoping you could share some information today and help the community better understand.
Like you mentioned.
Oh yeah, so my first question. No, go ahead.
No, go ahead with your question.
No, I'll wait.
No, I'll wait for you. Go ahead.
Please proceed. Okay, so my first question, the State Performance Plan, which is often called SPP, there are 17 indicators. You told me something about 20, and I didn't know that. So 17, 20, looking at the information, could you just explain a little bit behind that and help us understand?
Is required by IDEA, and really IDEA set those 17 to measure delivery of services to SWD. Now remember, SWD means the hearing population, special ed. Now deaf is considered low incidence, which means a very small number, which means the concept of this range, deaf people may be just a very small, maybe 0.001%. And so they have fallen into that category. IDEA spirit, I support that concept because they ensure students with disabilities have appropriate access, which is supposed to be for all students with disabilities. But with that issue is deaf population is put into that, which they have then been labeled disability. Disabled. So our community knows that we are language people. We have many deaf people who do contribute. They're American citizens. They pay taxes. They run businesses. They're teachers. I mean, many deaf people are very successful in our country. And they have gone through that system growing up. Many of them have graduated from residential schools or schools that practice bilingual ASL and English. Some students, the parents already sign early. And so those were the language people, and that's why it really conflicts with the students with disabilities because they already have language at birth, spoken language. They may have some other disabilities as well, but that law helps remove those restrictions and they can get into the public education. So deaf people should be able to get into general deaf ed as well, but they are put into special ed, but really they should be in deaf ed. So those 17, list of 17, we'll actually discuss 5 of them. They all measure how we deliver the services to those students. Now, many states have a reporting mechanisms. Some of them are online. California, they have dashboard. Different states have different ones. Federal law mandates and the federal law mandates it, but the state decides how to meet it. So the metrics do vary from state to state. It is not standard across the board. So now let's think about Tier 5. It basically says that the district cannot refer the students out of their public system to a non-public school. NPS, for example, a charter school, a deaf school, residential school, or a homeschool or a private school. Those they are not able to refer out to. It has to stay within the district. Like I explained back in 1975, prior to that, they were outsourcing out of district and they were not getting appropriate services. So the district is forcing them. So Tier 5 says that they have to be within that school public system where they have a certain percentage. For example, California is at 36 or 38. It's in that threshold. And the law says that at 38, like for example, say there are 100 students in one district.
Oh, you froze. Oh, you just froze. Can you start again at 100?
Okay, I'll repeat myself. So say there was 100 students. And there were 4 students with disabilities within that district. Now, those 4 that are referred out, which would mean the state would shake their hand at them and say they did not meet their SPP goal. So the district is afraid of that. So they want to make sure that they are meeting them. So what's happening is those deaf students are not placed to a deaf school for that reason. Now, I know that in my heart that nobody wants to discriminate against deaf children. I don't think that. I just think it's just a technicality. If they meet certain things and they really forget about, the individual needs, it's all about the metrics. So the IEP, Individual Education Program, the purpose of that is to remove the restrictions for that child, which means if they are deaf, then they take a look at that and they place them at a deaf school because it removes the restrictions and they can socialize with their peers, while the hearing population has the same. Now that number 5 may prevent them from that, and it may lead to a smaller population of school because they are misassigned.
Oh, I see. So that answers my first question. So my second question is for deaf people, we're specifically related to indicator 5. And within indicator 5, there's A, B, C, and C is the one we're talking about,
So
the different lines.
80%, B is 60%, and then C is full. How many students are involved 60% of the time or 80% of the time? So that bottom one's at 0%. So if they're involved in a deaf school, then they're still playing public schools and sports. But now they are may not in the classroom with the hearing students, but again, we just want to emphasize language. So most deaf children need that language. If they're unable to hear, if it's a hearing disability, well, the law interprets that, but really it's language. It's language acquisition of ASL. And research, there's a lot of research now showing that early language, either English, ASL, or other languages, more like second, third, or fourth languages are easier to acquire. There's already proofs. And so that is the student should have a language-based school.
Oh, great. Okay. So that 5C, well, specifically indicator 5, how does that impact deaf people?
Well, obviously, it's going to impact our language, our culture. The great things that we did in the country thus far over the 2, 3, 400, 500 years, many deaf people in our history who have fought for betterment of this country, they have contributed to the world as well. Many of our deaf people did solve many world challenges in different ways. That can impact if there are some school closures, if there are no language-based instruction for our students, if it's all pivoted towards spoken or different modalities. There's no research proven to be effective. There might be some research for written, but the deaf community knows. We all know if we've all grown up through it. We look at the people that are successful in our community, and all of those are more likely to have early language acquisition. Some may be a little bit later, but they were able to maybe got placed into a school, maybe in elementary, and they were able to catch up and be successful. Many deaf people are successful in life, so I think it's very important that the deaf community reach out to the professionals, the state, the agencies, the federal level, and let them know that I'm an expert in this field. It may be a small percentage, but we can give this information to you because we were raised in the system. We were raised through that law.
Sure, that's true. So, specifically, is indicator 5 a federal mandate?
Yes, IDA is a federal law. It is mandated. And how there's nothing written on that. So the state decides how it is going to be applied. So if you want to change the law, obviously you have to go to the federal level, which will be a challenge. It will be very difficult. I'm not concerned about the law itself. I think what's important is that we reach out at the state level and let them know that the deaf students need language-based schools. That if the school has something where it has to be a deaf school or a public school, no, that it just needs to be that there are language models happening there, that the curriculum is fitting to a visual learner. If they have all of those, then that's fine. Then they will benefit. The students will benefit greatly. So I think the important thing is that each state is unique. California and other states, you guys know your state and your structure and your governance and how the key players are in your state. I think the important thing is for you guys to connect with them, reach out with them about 5C and how it impacts deaf children in the state. Not just focus on residential schools, but just in general. Because I know many times they will realize that they will run to the experts and ask what to do. And then we can guide them on how they can provide services to the students, which maybe we will set up regionalized programs within the state, or maybe refer out to a deaf school, or maybe increase the deaf services within their state where they could serve the entire state, really. I think it's more of how we present it to the state level. The federal is already established. I think maybe it's the state that we need to look at. And I think if everybody works together with the state, that we can identify common themes and then reach out to the federal level at that point, and then they can realize that they can add something into that. I really don't know exactly how the legislative process works, but we can figure out a way to reach out because I am worried about each student individually. I'm not looking at the law, I'm looking at the human nature. They have feelings, they have a brain, they have eyes, nose, ears, and all of that. So that's what I'm trying to promote.
Okay. So, reaching out to the state, would that mean through legislative action, or what does that look like? Can a state override a federal level?
The federal trumps state law. So I think what's important is that the special education director in your state, all state department education does
Yes.
have a special education director. I think the important thing is to reach out to them, have a conversation. I don't want to make it resistive. It doesn't need to be like that. It doesn't need to be an argumentative. I think it needs to be more of a guided, interactive. Maybe give stories of different people growing up in different school settings. Some of them might be mainstream. Some of them may have been more resource. Some may be more deaf school residential. But I think the important thing is to share the stories with them those life experiences and then reach out maybe to the deaf school in your area or some expert that is experienced in that field, maybe a retired superintendent, retired principal. Get with them, and then maybe the state can realize that they can develop some type of agreement with all districts that the deaf students maybe apply to 5C that would justify their needs and it would not hurt them because of the 5C tier limited percentage. They could just waive that and let them go. But for general SWD, follow the federal tiers. Of course, make sure that they're serving all. But if the district is unable to do that, then give a waiver instead of just saying no because of a certain percentage. That's not right, and that's what we mean.
Okay, so is it possible to get a waiver for districts so they don't get in trouble for not meeting that percentage?
Really, again, the law is mandated, but the state decides on how it's executed. So how the
Okay.
waiver process would go would differ from state to state, but based on my experience in California, it
Right.
seems like they are understanding that the students need language. California School for the Deaf seems to be working out good, Riverside and Fremont, but we have not seen anything formalized explaining to the special education or the LE local education. It's a district, but they have a special education program specialist or a director or how the school district is set up. And that person will decide what the students' needs are. And then they may refer them out to a residential school or they may keep them into a district. And I think that decision-making body can make such decisions in conjunction with the deaf programs within their state.
I understand. Thank you. Thanks for explaining that. And possible waiver is interesting. But states aren't trying to avoid that yet, right?
No, I spoke with our special education director and they seemed very open. But the how is what we're still working on. But they haven't said no. And why do they have a deaf school now? I mean, if they're wanting zero, then they should have closed a long time ago, but it's still running. So there is some leeway somewhere. It's just all about the players that we're working with.
Great. Okay. So let me see. Yeah, we already talked about possible legislative action. Let's see. Important argument talking points. You mentioned that. It seems that it would be best for us to come together as a community and discuss strategies for what to do there. If not, what needs to be done? You already answered that. Okay, do you think that we should address Lead K? It seems they have been involved in legislative action for a while. I'm curious if their perspective is a good approach for this work.
Lead K really focus on kindergarten ready, which means milestones. Students 0 to 5, certain things that they have acquired, if they measure those, then they can be ready for kindergarten. The districts have to report that. So the students, VCSLL, visual communication sign language, their scores and other assessments that the school uses, they have to report. But now I think the state of California has their own assessment and each state has their own. But the bottom line is the districts have to report that the child in my district now at 5 years old is ready for kindergarten or they are not. While the federal focuses on kindergarten to 12, but 0 to 5 does play a big role with the early language acquisition. The earlier they acquire, the more likely they are to succeed. Not just deaf children, but hearing as well. I mean, how do hearing kids arrive to kindergarten ready? Because natural, incidental learning. They have overheard conversations at the grocery store, the TV, their parents. Same thing. When parents are explaining things to their children. So then when they're 5, they have language foundation and they go to English. Hearing kids are monolingual, but deaf kids are bilingual. And research shows that bilingual tend to start off delayed, but then over time they do catch up and sometimes pull ahead. So there is really no difference than our students.
Great. Okay, looking here at my other questions. What do other states do with their organizations, other organizations? For example, what is CSD's position on Indicator 5?
One pro in America is there's so many organizations here throughout the country. CEASD, it's more of an education administration for this deaf program. They have NAD, they have CSD, Communication Services for the Deaf. They have VRS companies that are knowledgeable with language issues. There are state agencies in each state. They have parent groups that are affiliated with the schools. I mean, think about it. If you list what organizations you have in your state, you have the resources right there in front of you. It's just a matter of connecting everything and getting everybody on the same understanding and then figuring out how to address the concerns here for all the deaf kids within the state. It's very important to focus on everything. The deaf school, yes, it's very important, but really we want to look at what the model is and the best practices through over the state. They may realize that, oh, they have not utilized those organizations or those deaf community experts, and it might be time to start using us so that we can solve those state issues regarding kids' placements of not being ready or not graduating, which impacts the federal. And I think that we can solve that by working with them. And I think it's really important that each state is unique. We can't, what happens in California, we can't have happen in Colorado. Every state leadership needs to take action and accountability.
Great. Now, my last question, unless you want to add something, which you are welcome to do, but my last question is, why should stakeholders, maybe the deaf community members, parents, anyone who is concerned about this issue, why should they care? What's your view?
Once language is gone, deaf hearing, like for example, tribal languages, the result of those being taken, the culture goes away, the community goes away because of the language. The language is what holds people together. So the deaf community needs to ensure that their language remains because we have proof that many successful people live in our country. Language is the key. And I wanted to think about CASD. They have a lot of position placement papers. If you go into their website, there is one that's focused on the LRE, least restrictive environments position. You can use that for the state arguments. Different position papers. NAD may have some as well. Different organizations should have all of their position papers to show the importance of the deaf community and the deaf supports in their states. Also, I did want to mention those 7 things to consider if you'd like to discuss with people or the state or whoever in your community. 7 important things. The first one is critical mass, numbers. 100 students in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, or maybe 50 students in sophomore, junior, senior. You get those experts, state standards, they can meet those. And I know that many schools, many districts have maybe 4 or 5 students in middle school, which means how do we teach the standards with just one teacher? I'm not really sure how that happens. I think what we need to have is maybe a 6th grade teacher, a 7th grade teacher, and an 8th grade teacher. So we have content delivery that is equivalent to the public schools. Because when you go into public schools, they have different tracks. They have math, they have arts, everything is a certain track, but in deaf schools, they're all put together. So the more students, critical mass, more socialization they have. Language needs. Every student's language needs vary. Some may arrive fluently in ASL, native ASL user. Some of them maybe arrive fluent literacy, but they can speak, but their hearing is going away. Some are very delayed. They may not have correct placement. Some may have moved from another country. I am noticing that more and more are moving from other countries. They may have language in their country, some of them may not. So language needs to vary. You cannot just set up a one expectation for everybody like a public school. I mean, you see that they're okay with reading and writing on track, but there's so many reasons behind because in the hearing population, they have normal acquisition. Incidental learning, which means you go into a classroom and you learn, but then what happens after classroom, between classroom, in those passing periods, in physical education, after school programs, sports, plays? Many times deaf children do not have that access in public education, including my experience growing up. But over at the deaf school, they do have a plethora of it because of critical math. They can create more programs in that critical mass. Extracurriculars. Many of them develop skills, life experiences. Sports teaches a lot of life applications, organizations, leadership, going out to different campuses and visiting different conferences, youth conferences, for example, junior NAD. Those experiences are critical, and that is part of incidental learning. Mentoring and advocates. Many times, the district, there might be one person there, one student. So, who's going to mentor them? Who's going to mentor the parents? Who's going to advocate for that student? While at a critical mass community, there's many different mentors. There's different approaches. There's different advocates. Like, for example, us speaking today. Many of you guys who are watching, you guys are advocates as well. So I think it's very important that the students will benefit from this as well, and not just leaving the burden on the school and turning a blind eye. No, we are all accountable for this. Definition of inclusion. Inclusion means that deaf person should be put in general education. Why are they put at the deaf school? That's least restrictive environment. Well, no, the IEP says that my restrictions are removed, so I can go to either one. Deaf children may want to go to the deaf school because of critical mass and language and all of that. So inclusion, you can tell them, yes, I support that. Inclusion is already happening in deaf programs. Back then, if you remember growing up at a deaf school, I remember that they had, the A's, the B's, and the C's classes, and then they had the special needs classes, but they were separated. Lunch, they would socialize, and then they would have lunch B. And then after school sports, they would not have them involved unless they were really good. But today, that's not like it. Everybody's mixed. Everybody's in PE together. Everybody's in extracurriculars. Class time, yes, they are split up based on ability to match the curriculum and grade level, but it's not labeling the person or their abilities. That has changed in our country. Many schools are already integrating that in our school, so we are already inclusive in our way. To put them into hearing, there's no language. At the deaf school, they have the deaf language there. Teachers who work with the students are able to interact with them, just like hearing teachers are able to interact with hearing kids. Maybe we teach at hearing schools, well, we have to go through interpreters, so those students may suffer because of us. So it really is the same thing at deaf children in a public school. So parents' choice. Some states, the parents can decide that I'm going to apply for a certain school. Some states, you have to be referred through LEA, an agency. So they may look at Tier 5 and they might look at the percentage and they say, oh, no, it might be best that you come here because it has this programs. But really, they're empty promises. If you just look at the student's needs and their IP and what the student and the parent wants, but many times some kids hit roadblocks and they're not able to get a direct path to school. Some states you can. So maybe we can encourage to have the model where all parents have a right to choose the school. So those are the 7 things that I discussed you guys to consider when you are having your discussions with whoever in your state. And the legal and all the laws, you'll sometimes face certain things where you can just give them laws. The takeaway of IDEA is it's open to interpretation. It's open-ended. And how you interpret it and how we interpret it, we need to negotiate and we have to work through it. Some states may be more resistive. Some may have an open mind. And some may say, oh, yeah, but do nothing. So you just have to be persistent with this. And you have to keep going and reaching out and finding so we can get what we need for our students.
Wow, you covered everything on my list. I hope the community has a better understanding now of the indicators. Thank you.
And I just want to close that all of you guys who are watching this message, you guys already have experience. You guys have a lot of experience growing up in the system. You guys do not need to have degrees. The degree only qualifies you for a job. But other than that, you guys know what's happening. You guys know. You guys have your story. So be bold. And it's important to develop those relationships and then be bold. Sometimes being bold, the relationships disconnect and then nothing gets done. So get that relationship established first and then be bold because you have a lot. Take action. work with your schools and your community and the organizations. Go ahead and proceed. And I look forward to seeing us all connecting at a national level. And then maybe we can move to the next step for all states. So then our children will thrive. We're good at the deaf schools, but what about those children? If so, then it will impact the deaf schools to grow as well.
It's
Thank you.
awesome. Thank
Thank
you
you.
for covering
Great.
everything. Take care. Thank you.